so now we're recording. So just to start, basically what we'll be looking at is building up an image that essentially looks like this. So basically we're going to be taking a blank 2D drawing and building it up so it has a certain amount of, that shows a cut line, shows some texture and background, some sky and trees and people. Just a kind of simple information and a sense of light in it. So to start, and we don't have the base scan, so I'm going to show you first how to clean up a base drawing that might be a little messy. So you'll have a hand-drawn sketch, or that might, as you scan it, it might kind of look like this, which you don't want to work with that as a background. So the first thing you want to do is kind of make just a pure white surface out of it. So what I'm going to do is use a command called levels. So I do Control L, and actually I'm going to back up before I jump into that. For those of you who haven't used the software before, basically the layout of the interface. You're probably familiar with these kind of basic menu options of file, edit, image, and there'll be a few of these that will pop into, but you don't typically work off of these. This is a command line that basically shifts, and can everyone hear me okay? I know there's noise, you can feel free to shut the window. These menus will change as you change to different command options, so you can see how those are updating. And then this over here, is the sorry, don't want to crop. I'm just gonna don't crop. Yeah.
Could you maybe like zoom in a little bit? It's really hard to see what the actual backgrounds are on this side.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Thanks. Wonder if I could change to. Is that better, or you just need this to be larger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's see if I can adjust that. I might have to adjust my screen resolution. Yeah, maybe we'll use that. Oh no, I want to use the ThinkPad display. I will maybe bump that down. Or I think it'll up. Let's see if that works. What that does. Oh boy. Is that better? Yeah? Okay, so we'll keep those changes. Yeah, so you can see that better? Awesome. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, and any of you who A, have questions, or B, those of you who have experience with this and are like, actually there's a different way of doing this, or there's, you guys might want to know about this, feel free to jump in. I'm actually gonna, yeah. Can you see that better? Is that helpful? So these over here are going to be the buttons that you use the most, and these are basically your command prompts. And we'll go over different elements of those, but if you want to find out, there's also nested tools within them. So if you right-click over them, that will tell you what the kind of nested elements are underneath those. And there are different ways of selecting and making edits to images. This little panel over here, and I'm not sure why there's two of them, but typically it's just one panel. This will have interfaces that you'll use less frequent. I mean, in the workflow, you basically go back and forth between these two. These are like actions, and these are like organizational sort of elements. So the big thing here is layers. Thanks. All right. How about now? A little more. Okay. How about now? That's good, right? All right. So yeah, so the big thing is your layers panel, and that will basically, we'll be using that. I'll show you basically, how to be using that, but basically that's where you'll be going for it, and that's a major way you organize the files. So these are like your layers of trace, essentially. And you'll find that you can tear these things off, and they'll get floating, and you can just kind of pick them again and drag them back. So you'll get used to the interface. A couple other things to zoom in and out. I'll hold down the Alt key. A big thing is to get a scroll wheel mouse if you don't. Some people try and do this with their trackpad, and I mean, I've seen generations of students do this, and it just blows my mind. Your life will be easier with the mouse, with the scroll wheel. So if you hold down the Alt key and scroll wheel, you'll zoom in and out. If you hold down Control and scroll, it'll go back and forth. Spacebar will give you pan, and so that's just a fast way of navigating through different options in here. So to jump into the, let's make sure there's nothing else that I want to cover on that. Well, one thing when you bring in an image, the first thing you want to do with it is rasterize it. So you can go over the layer. I think this actually might already be. Yeah. So you just rasterize the layer whenever you bring an image in, and that basically transforms it. So I mentioned, or I think Emily might have mentioned the difference between vector kind of software and raster software. So a raster will basically manipulate images that are a set of pixels. So that's what this is doing. Vector software uses mathematical calculations to generate lines. So there's no pixels there except from your screen. It's actually a live element that as you zoom in and out, it'll have the same resolution. So Illustrator is a vector software, but uses raster, can manipulate raster images as well. So we'll show you that. So, so the first thing I'm going to do is go to levels. So that's Control L. You can also find it under image. So image will give you different ways, tools of adjusting image information. So I can go image levels, but you can also see here prompt for Control L. If I pick this guy here, that's going to take this kind of darkest area. So you pick on a kind of area that you want to sort of get rid of that value. Oops, that didn't work. Again, this is somewhat new stuff for me. So why didn't that work? It's supposed to do the opposite. Okay, this worked yesterday. Control L. So one thing I'll sometimes do in my own workflow is I'll say auto, okay, and then if that doesn't do what I want it to do, I can actually do the transformation using these sliders, and so that will clean it up. But try, see this guy, cancel that, and see what happens if I pick this one. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to happen. So I was picking the wrong eyedropper. So you see how bright that got. And then what I'll want to do is do some selections to cut out some of this information. So these are different selection tools with shapes, and this is a selection tool with what's called a lasso. So I'm going to use this, and you can see that'll just select that. Now if I hold down Shift, you can see a little plus sign shows up. That's going to add to that selection. If I hold down Control, or it's like Alt, you see a little minus sign. That's going to subtract from it. Okay, so that's just a quick way of doing those selection tools. And I didn't hit down the Alt on that one, or the Control on that one, so it dropped the rest of the selection. But I can, if I want, I can go Control Z to get that back. Now you only get one Control Z, but if you do Control Alt Z, you can get multiple undos. So I'm going to hold down the Shift, oops, and take those guys out, and then I'm going to do Control X to cut that. Now you can see that black showed up, which is not what I want. That's a black background, so I'm going to undo that. And what I'm going to over here are two color swatches, and the black one is what's going to be in the background of your drawing. And so it's not on the layer background, but it's basically a basic background for the image. So I'm going to change that to white, and so I just double clicked on that to get the color picker menu. So now when I take those guys out, there should be a white background behind me. And I can continue cleaning up in that way. I can also use the lasso tool, so that the little angular lasso gives you basically a straight selection, and they can see how it gets a little zero there. That means you're about to close that selection. I'll just X that out. I can also use a smoother selection tool, so that I'm just moving my mouse as I select to do that. And a handy thing with selections is you can actually save that selection. So say you want, and there'll be an example of this in the exercise, but say I want to, for some reason, select this shape, and I want to do some manipulations to it. I want to, say I want to change the brightness to it, so I'll go image, adjustments, brightness, contrast, and so you'll see when I adjust the brightness to that, come on, this always happens when you're doing demonstrations, that it doesn't do what you want it to do. Let's see. Let's try. So I'm going to try something here. I'm going to select the whole canvas, Control A. And so actually, what's sometimes good when you bring in an image is to kind of keep the base image untouched. So a lot of times I'll do is I'll just Control A, Control C. Whoops, I'm not on the right layer. So pick the background there. Control C for copy, and then Control V, and that will just paste that image again into a new layer. And then I can turn the background off, and I'm not manipulating it. So if I ever need that information again, I can get it.
Really fast. You Control A to do what, and Control C?
Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and Control V to paste. Don't be concerned about getting these individual little commands. Again, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and like, okay, what did he say? What did he do? Yeah, so you'll be able to get that information again. So now let's see if that works. So I'll pick this again, and then I was going to see if I could adjust the brightness on that part. No. Okay. Well, I'll do something else to it, and I'm not really sure why it is. There's something called the paint bucket tool. I can make a color over that. I think there might be an issue with. Anyway. So and then but I can also right click, and I can, if I'm in this selection mode, I can right click and say Save Selection, and I could just give that a name. Just call it box. And then what that does is it saves it as a channel. So I'm going to so deselect. I go Control D, and that deselects that. And actually, I'm going to Control Z a couple times here because what I did was I made that box on the same layer that the image is on, and I don't want that. I actually want that to be on its own layer. So anytime you click that, you can see you're highlighting that layer and making it active. So I'm going to go back and do my paint bucket, and that's going to basically cover that up. And then I'm going to deselect, go on to some other command. Or actually, no, before I deselect, sorry, I'm going to save that selection. And I'll give it that name again. And again, naming your layers and keeping that organized is actually quite an important part of this process, because you'll get files with like 40 or 50 layers, and you just have no idea what something is. So try and keep them somewhat organized. So if I go to channels, what I can do is I can they'll deselect. I can turn that guy on and turn that off, and that gives me this white square again. So I want to get that selection back. There's something called the magic wand, where if you just pick inside an area that has all the same color, it'll actually select inside that area. So now I have that selection back, and go back to my layers, turn those back on, turn that back off, and now I have that selection back, and I can say I actually want to give that a different color, say. And then I can go here, get my different color, paint bucket that. So that's all. So basically, you'll update that image, and then you'll bring it into a new document. And so we'll start with this one. I'll close that. And so you can usually just drag and drop this in. So this is the base drawing that we're going to start from. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rasterize the layer. So should I'm not sure why that's. Well, we'll come back to that. We'll be rasterizing other layers. I'm not sure why it's not doing that. So you also want to set up the artboard. So if you say canvas size, I want to make this an 11 by 17 document. The other thing that you'll want to check is your the resolution on your image. So 150 is a decent resolution. Typically, you want your images to be up to 300. We'll keep it at 150 for this exercise. But 150 will be pretty okay for printing. You can go down to 72 if it's just a web-based, but things get pretty ugly. And you want to watch that pixelization. So when the images start looking really like a bunch of little pixels, people are really sensitive to that, and it really distracts from the image. So one of the things I want to do with this is I want to actually have this line go to the edge. So I can use my selection tool. I'm going to select that. If I go Control T, so I'm not on the right layer. So you'll notice if I try to do that, it's telling me it's empty, even though I'm looking at that layer has nothing on it. So I have to have an active layer. And actually, what I'm also going to do, I'm going to Control A, Control C, Control V to just make a new base layer. So this I'll just call import, so I know that that's what that is, and maybe I'll put a 0 in front of that because sometimes words just kind of zoom through your head and you don't totally get that. So I'll call this underlay, and I will select that, Control T, and now what that lets me do is Control T is transform, and that's just going to let me drag and manipulate that bit of information that I selected. And I can do different things with it. We'll look at transform again. So Control T, and you can also find that I think up here. I don't use these. I usually use command prompts. I'm not always going up here to find those commands. So it's probably located somewhere. So Control T, transform, and then I just drag that out, and then Enter to finish that. So the first thing I'm going to do is generate a layer that's going to give me what's called poché. So poché is literally French for pocket, and it's basically space that you can't see. So if I'm standing in here, I can't see that. If I'm standing out here, I can't see that. So it's all this kind of invisible goo that's structure and stuff. And a lot of times, so in our section cuts, we hide that information and use that as what we work off of. So I'm going to use the magic wand tool to pick all this information that I want for the poché. And you can see it has the plus active. I can change that up here. I can make it inverse, or I can just have it be a single selection. So I'll lose that information if I just select up here. So I'll keep that as an additive thing. So it's selecting all this information that I want for my section cut. And now I'm going to go to a new layer for that, and I'm going to call that layer poché. So now the thing that I'm going to do with that layer is I'm going to make a kind of outline and a fill for that. So to do that, I'm going to go to something called blending options and select color overlay. And then I can assign a color to that selection with my paint bucket tool. And then also, and the color isn't significant because I can go back and I can change that color. So I can come back here and I can just say, actually I want that to be more of a gray, or in this instance, we're just going to make that a white. The other thing you can do is you can add a stroke to that. So that's basically a contour or an outline to it, and you can adjust the size of that. So that's just going to be an outline cut for that. And the reason I'm doing that is I basically want to create just the line work for my image, not use the background image to rely on that, because maybe that cut line wasn't super clear in my sketch. And again, I can go back and that's still a little thick for me, so I can bump that down. And then if I want, and I can actually save this selection again in case I need to come back to it. So to save your selection, you have to have a selection tool active. So I'm just going to save that, and I'll title it poché again in case I need that. So then I can deselect all that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a image. Let me just make sure I get I'm going to basically show some depth with these doorways here. So I'm going to make a new layer, call that door, and I'm going to use the selection tool again, or the magic wand. And the thing with the magic wand, see, I'm not on the right layer, so I want to activate underlay. I should. Oh, it's already had all that selected. So, yeah, so that's just going to select that outline, and I can get that window and that window. Now, with the magic wand, I'm just going to undo that. If I set that tolerance up higher, so tolerance is how sensitive basically that is to other colors around it. If I set that up really high, you'll see that it actually selected much more information than I wanted to. So you actually want to keep that at a pretty low number. 20 or 30 is typically a good number to have. So I'm going to deselect all that, come back, select these guys. And then I'm going to basically use the paint bucket tool again to give a kind of shadow to that. Boom. So now there's a little bit of depth started to happen there. Now the other thing you can do, say you want to, there's some detail in here that we want to show. And sometimes if you don't have time to draw like a whole pattern of something, you can actually say grab an image that roughly shows what you want, and I'm going to make a new layer. Well, actually, it's going to just do. It'll make the layer for me. Or it should make the layer for me when I drag that in. So I've already named that texture as a image file. So I drag it in. It's going to ask me with this X if I want to change the shape of this, so I can distort it before I actually place it. And that I'm just grabbing those handles. So you can see it's kind of randomly doing that, but if I hold shift down, it's going to keep the proportions. You can also rotate it. If you hold the shift down again, it's going to rotate it in intervals. So the shift key is actually quite helpful. And so I'm going to go through back to its original size. Okay. No, it's not going to do that. All right, so go back to there. Now let's see if this rasterize works. Yeah, okay. So it's just rasterizing that to put into pixels. So now as I shrink and expand it, it's a kind of fixed resolution to it. So I'm going to position that roughly where I want it in here, and I'm going to go Control T again to transform that. I'm going to keep the proportions for now until I get it a little closer to where I want it, and then I'm going to zoom in and pan. Oh, no, I'm not going to be able to pan. Sometimes when you're in the middle of a command, you can't actually, or I find I can't pan, so I'll use the arrows there to move up and down. And I'm going to position that sort of roughly where I want, and maybe stretch it to. So I kind of want a little bit of. And you can nudge too. So if you use your arrow keys, you can kind of move up and down. If you hold the shift down, it'll move in bigger increments. So I'm just going to nudge, nudge, nudge. We'll call that good enough. And then Enter is going to fix that. Now you can see I'm kind of floating out here in space. So again, you can see here how important layers are. If I drag that in front of the poche, it's going to be visible. But I basically want to cut that out. And so I'm just getting this information. So I'll go to this lasso tool and just go inside the poche there. And I get to this point, and then I hold my shift key down, and that's going to let me go straight across, go up, and there we go. Now I don't want to cut this out. I want to cut everything on the outside out. So if I right click, I get select inverse, and that's going to flip the selection. So now when I cut, everything I didn't want goes away. Now what I can also do, because I actually might want that selection back later, so again I'm going to just save selection in case I want that. We'll just call that done. I'll say OK. And yeah, so I will now cut that out. And then with that, I can actually also adjust the opacity of it. It's a little strong for me, so I want to actually knock that down a bit so it sort of sits back in there a little better. But again, you can see if I drag texture, you can see what that actually looks like. I'm going to drag that back under. So the next thing I'm going to do is start to throw some people in here. And again, it's a similar process. You just drag and drop. One thing, so it's called Entourage, is the sort of name we use for it. This is actually a site where you can get people for free. That's a handy thing. So sometimes places will charge you for it. And it's important that the files, or the best files you can get, and you can see they're people kind of, they're sort of interesting people doing odd, eccentric things. You can, and we'll give you that website. You want to use PNG files, PNG files. Those don't have a kind of white border or background to them, so they mesh more cleanly with the scene. So I'm going to drag this person in and just enter, and again I will rasterize layer. Control T, bring her to, and one of the things you'll want to do, people you'll find, especially those of us who are traditional, or were trained very traditionally and did all our work by hand, we get really freaked out about people not being scaled correctly. So a lot of times if you scan something, make a little line in there that is actually the right height for a person, and then you can use that as a reference. You can also, if you haven't done that, you can reference off doors or stairs, or make it look somewhat plausible. I think she's still a little big, so I'm just gonna make her a little smaller here. This feels a little better. So I'm gonna place her into this zone here. Now again, it's basically going to be a similar process that I used before. I'm going to use blending options because again, you don't want people to focus on, you can see like how much she's standing out in the image, right? You don't want people to focus on that. You want the people to blend with that. So there's different things you can do. You can change the opacity on them. In this instance, what we're doing, and to get blending options, I'm just right-clicking over the layers. So again, I'll go to the color overlay, and I'll see, so you can see as I do that she's white, so she kind of stands out right there. So I'll just say okay, leave that, and then I'll do a couple other people. So we'll grab this guy, and we'll grab these guys, and I will this, and then I will transform them down, and I will do the same for him. And if I want to flip to another layer, so you can see I was going Control T and it's still highlighting these guys. I want to move on to this guy. If you right click, you'll see you get a layer options, and I know from the naming that's that guy that I want, so I just select, so I right clicked on them when I went down there, or when I hovered over him. So I'm going to make, he's a little giant still, so I'll bring him down again. So this guy, he's going to go outside, and again, to kind of, so if I've made him white, he's not going to be that effective there, so when I do this thing here, I will actually make him a little gray, make him blend in, and I'll do the same for these people. Whoops, so I'm going to grab there. They're coming to the space, they're not there yet. Blending options, color, yeah, say okay. So let's see. Yeah. So the next thing I want to do is see if I get this bit right. So I'm kind of diving off the deep end here. We'll see if I remember what was happening in this part. Basically, what we want to do is shrink this so we can get more of the drawing, so the building's not so prominent, so we can get more space for trees and landscape. So I just selected all that information, and I'm going to transform it and bring it down here. So it has a little more room to breathe. Now I think what we do here is, basically now we have this border here that's kind of a pain, so we want that to go away. I'm going to go to this guy here, get my polygon lasso tool. I'm going to, no, I guess we're going to do the lighting later. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to actually highlight my layer that I want to effect, which is the poche layer. And then I'm going to make sure that that's on adding to the selection toggle. And then I'm going to basically just come around here, and I'm going to, essentially what this is doing is it's adding to this already developed poche. So let's see if this works. So I go and I edit color overlay, and I say, okay, is this gonna add to that? No. So we'll try the paint bucket. Let's see. Okay, so that should be, so it's doing something, but basically it should be expanding this this selection. Oh, see, it's highlighted like that. Try this one time. No. Eek. That's not going to do anything for me. Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, I just basically clicked the paint bucket in that blank area. We'll try this again. Let's see. Oh. I want to get further in here. I'm just holding the shift key down again to get that. And again, my navigation, like the scroll wheel isn't helping me at this point, so I'm just sort of freewheeling it here. And now I can zoom out, and we'll try that again. Where's my paint bucket? Here we go. Okay. So let's see. And then if I go back to color overlay, can it give me that line? Let's see. Yeah. So the line, so the contour is there still as well. So it's a little choppy, but we'll just move on from that. So now I have a little more room for adding other stuff into this scene. So now we're going to add trees. And this will show you some information about editing images. So this is actually a JPEG, which has a white background to it, and I actually want to get rid of that white background in here. So I'm going to drag that in. And you can see how that's not doing such a great job of being a tree. I'm going to sort of press enter to bring that in. I'm going to rasterize the layer, transform, bring it down. So there's a couple options you have here. One is you can change the opacity style on this. So you can go to multiply, and what multiply does, is it basically samples out all the white information, but what you can see is it also makes it transparent so you can see information behind. It's actually a really helpful tool, but you can see it also really messes with the color of that. So if you don't want that happening, there's other options. And we'll go back to normal with the opacity. So this, what we're going to do is it's similar to another magic wand moment, but we're going to use a selection tool called color range. And again, making sure we're on the right layer, we're going to basically zoom in and select the information that we want in that color range. And so let's see. So we should be able to see here what's, yeah. So now you can see what's being selected. So if I didn't, and so the white stuff is being selected, but it's selecting a little too much. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to redo that. And so it's really just showing up here what's being selected. I'm going to drag the fuzziness down so you can see there's more stuff showing up. We'll see what that does. So that's still a little light. I'll try that one more time. And we'll kind of really drag that down. Yeah, that's a little better. And we're just on that layer, so it's not going to cut everything out from the scene. It's just going to cut stuff out from that layer. And so now that tree still has its saturation that we want. I'm going to nudge it back up over these people, but most of the information's cut out of it. So I can bring in this other tree here. And what this is going to show us is, you can see how saturated that is. But again, this is a ping file, so it's actually, I don't need to go through that issue that we just went through. I'm going to rasterize that. Drag it down. So you can see it's a lot of repetitive work, right? So if you had an army of small children to help you, you would be much faster at this. So maybe drag this guy over here. So to decrease the saturation on this, I can go to a menu here under Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. So I can basically drop that down so it blends a little more closely with the scene. I can also, change other attributes of the image, such as the lightness of it, if I wanted. And then if you drag too far out, you can just go back here and go 0. I'll bring you right back. I could change the color of it or the hue if I wanted, which I don't really want a purple tree, but sometimes you do. Kind of make a point. This is a brave new world that you're showing. So, and I might also just I might see if I can adjust the lightness on that a little. It's a little heavy for me still, but let's see. Maybe exposure. So you can just play around with different tools to see what they do for you in terms of developing your eye for the scene. So it's sort of sitting a little better. Now finally, or not finally, next to last, we'll do lighting. So we want to get some kind of atmosphere, as Eli was calling it, or ambiance. Ambiance was the word he used. Yes, I want some ambiance in this scene. So I'm going to make a new layer, and this is going to be using the gradient tool, and I'll call it ambiance. Why not? And this is going to be on the interior. So there's under paint bucket is this called, which is the gradient tool. And essentially the way this works is you kind of drag and it will make a gradient a blend from one color to another. And if I flip that, I'm going to undo that, you'll see it flips the color range. And there's different, flip that back, there's different kinds of gradients. So you can go from a dot like so. You can make a kind of hard edge like that. The one we're going to use is this, which will blend in 2 directions. I don't know why. Okay. Oh yeah. So it's blending in this direction and that direction. So I'm going to do a selection here, and I'm going to save this one also. But what I'm going to select is basically in the poche here, I'm going to basically make a line between interior and exterior. And again, holding the shift key down as I go through these vertical points. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of nudging to the edge here to make it move, float, make the screen float up. Oops. And then if you whoops. Let's see. Does that work? Yeah. If you select out here and you're not happy with that, you're like, oh man, I didn't mean to do that. You hit delete, the delete key, and it'll undo that last little guy for you. So that's the area that I want to have ambiance in. I'm going to go back to gradient. And basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in the direction I want the lighting to kind of dissipate in. And basically if I drag that further, you can see it extends that blending more, right? So I'm going to just use that. And now I'll go to my opacity on that layer. So that's starting to give me the effect that I want. And then if I bump that down even more, and now you can see it's on the, I have to bring that back in space, but that starts to give me a little bit of lighting effect. And I'm also going to, as I said, save that selection. I'll call that ambiance. We might come back to that. I'm going to deselect it, and I'm going to drag that under the poche. So now you can see we have some lighting effect in there. Now I also want to show light coming in through the doorway here. So I'm going to go to a new layer, and call this door light. We'll call this ambiance door, so I see that first when I'm scanning my layers. So as I come here, I'm just going to make like a little ray of light coming into the space. And the tool here, if you hit this guy called Refine Edge, that will actually help you create a kind of softer selection, so you can see how that feathers that out. You can also offset the selection a little bit more, one way or the other. So I'm just going to make that kind of a soft glow. And I will also use the gradient tool on this, but rather than having it go from a color, I'm going to change this to, or actually, where is this? No. If I go here, I can actually go from a color to no color. So if I select that, the little grid means that there's nothing going on behind, or there's no color in that space. So I'm going to go from a color to no color for my gradient, come down here, and you can just keep doing it until you get the effect that you want. We'll do that. And we'll see what happens. So you can see there's a little wash of light coming in through the door there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do some sky, and that will, I think, be the end of this portion. So I'm going to drag that in and position it. Get it a little bigger than I want. And basically what I want to do is have the sky fade out on top and bottom here. So I might just drag that up a little. Enter, rasterize there. So this is another selection tool. Oh, actually there's one other, well, I won't do it right now, but we did a gradient down here as well, which is just the same option, same job as selecting all that and then making that gradient under there. So this will be another selection tool, which let's see, it's called a quick mask. So This little tool down here, if I click that, that's going to be called a quick mask. And again, with the gradient tool, so if I have that on, I can do some selection, say with just a paintbrush, which we haven't really covered, but the brush tool, that red, basically I've now selected that information. So if I turn that off, that's now a selection, which is not the selection I want. So I'm going, and you can play with the size of brushes and that kind of thing and do the brush. I'm going to do a selection with my gradient, and I'm going to select and fade from here to here. So, oops, wrong direction. Oh, and I want to do the one-way gradient, not the two-way gradient. And let's see what this does. And so it's basically selecting pixels, even though, so when I unclick that, even though it's just giving me that outline, it's been selecting pixels in a kind of fade from down here to up there. And so if I cut that out, that's too much. So I'm going to redo that gradient. I'm going to unselect that. And gradient selection. All the way up to there. Oh, whoops. I didn't do the quick mask. I go higher. Get more. Oh. Let's just do that. And see what that does. That's not enough. So you can see you kind of just have to play around with that. Yeah, quick mask is not one. Let's try that. Yeah, so that's getting a little more of a fade. And I'll show you, I can come back with an eraser and deal with that. So I'll do the same thing down here. Not doing it as well. Let's try that. That's too much. Do a little more. Yeah, that's better. And then I'll also I'll drag the sky back behind the texture there. The one thing I wanted to do too is to cut out the windows here. So I'll go back to my underlay. I'll bring that below the underlay, and I will. Actually, it looks like that's been cut out already, but we'll just see if I can do that again. Yeah, so it's already been cut out. So you kind of get the effect of the windows through there. And then I can play again with the opacity of that, just to maybe bump it down a bit. And if you're kind of annoyed by that line there a little bit, you can take your brush, go to an eraser, adjust your brush, and you can start to erase that stuff out a little bit. And you can see here the opacity, so if I crank that opacity up, you can see it makes a really hard eraser through there, which I don't want. So I'm going to bump that down. And that is basically that image. Any questions? Immediate questions? Okay. I'm going to pause. Why don't we take a little, just resume. So for this, I'm going to use that same plan. Yeah, let's see if I have it here. No. See if I have it here. Okay. So I'm just going to start Illustrator. And so the Illustrator interface is very similar to your Photoshop. So all the Adobe software has similar interfaces to it. So once you kind of master one, you can figure out the other very, very quickly and easily. I'm not sure what this document is. Okay. So we'll just make a new one. And you can, choose the size of the document we want. We'll do another 11 by 17. And you have something in Illustrator called artboards. So if I want multiple pages, I can go File, Document Setup, and edit artboards, and I can add new pages here, and keep going. So, but we're just gonna, and then just hit enter and say okay. Oops. Okay. We're just gonna focus on this one artboard. Also, there's things called rulers. So you can right-click and say Show Rulers. You can also do Control-R, and you can change those to different dimensions if you want. And then if you want the 0 to start somewhere, you can go here, grab it, and that will tell you where you're starting everything. So I'm just going to grab this file, drag it in. And again, and so it's been scanned in size to that, but again, this transform also applies here. There's different keys to hold on to, but I think that one's just shift again. So pull that in, say okay. And again with layers, so I'll use that background layer. It's just a background, and I'll make some other layers, and I'll just call that background. So the first thing I'm going to do is do that main axis, because I think that's a really important element. And to do that, there's something called the pen tool. So I'll grab that guy. And again, with the shift key, and I'll maybe just start there, because there's this thing called Smart Guides, which kind of helps you figure out where you want to go. Now you can see how I'm still floating around with that. So I held down the shift key to do that straight. If I hold Control, then I click, that will get me out of that command, or out of that one line. And then I'm going to drag that to emphasize that axis. And then I want that to be emphasized a little more. So this is your stroke, and I can make it a dashed line. I can also make it thicker. I can make it a dash. This is called the center line, where it's like a dash, small dash line. So that's going to make it look like more of an axis and tell people that's an invisible line. And then if I want to change the color, these are the outline border, which is also here. I can double click that, and I can change the color of it. Or I can also change the color with the swatches panel there. So I'll change that color. And here if I were to make a shape, I'll just show you if I made like a rectangle. That would be a shape with an outline, but I don't want that. So I would actually hit this X, and that gives it no fill inside. It's called fill. Not P-H-I-L like your Uncle Phil, but F-I-L. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do then too is do that kind of outline that I mentioned. And I can lock layers so I don't draw on them. And so I'll do this, I'll just call this solid 1. And I will do the pen. In this I will have a fill to it, but I'll just start with the outline. And this is just going to be that basic solid, not the courtyard solid. Actually, I'll do the courtyard one just to save time. So I'm Control Zing out of this. So I'll come here and just sort of, and so all I'm doing is just picking, pointing and clicking. I'll go to there. In there. Okay, let's come back. That. And I'll show you too that you can, once you wrap this up, if you want to move a point, if you didn't quite get it the first time, you can also move it around. And I'll just go straight down to kind of indicate that that's the edge of my drawing. And so you can see the little circle pops up there. Oh, we're off the page again, right? Or off the screen. So now you can see that. Okay. And so I'm going to play around with so I'll change the fill. on this, and I'll make it solid like that. I'll also change the outline, so I'll go back here to the stroke editor. I'll undo the dashed, and I don't want that line, so I'll make that black as an outline. And so that's starting to show what I wanted to show. This here, this when the white arrow lets you pick little points of the drawing and move them in case you don't get it right the first time. If you want to sort of clean that shape up a little bit, and the same transparency applies. So this is transparency. So if I wanted to actually see what was behind there, I could hit multiply. But you'll see that at the end of this, you don't really actually want that guy showing up, or the background information showing up. So I'll just see if I can quickly go through here and pick this guy. And now you can see I have it hatched, and as I go around, I'm losing, it's going to be harder for me to figure out where I was. So I'm actually going to go here while I'm drawing it and go on to multiply, so I can kind of see what's around me. Oh, you know what I missed? I realize now. There's a really good last step. I'll just show you on the Photoshop one. It's like my favorite step, so I have to show it to you. I'll just go back through here really quick. It's related to this thing I'm going to show you on here, so that's what made me think of it. So just very quickly, trying to be very quickly here. Just go around, click, 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 click. And your life will become a lot of pointing and clicking, for better or for worse. And I don't want these multiply, so I'll go back and select them and go normal. So one way I could also, and then if I turn off the background layer, you can see that's starting to tell me something. Oh, my axis, I want that to be over top, so I'll bring that back up. And I could generate axes around here as well and start to, sort of develop that further. Now, one other way I could try and explore this is as a solid void relationship. So what I'll do, I'll make a new layer, and I will make a shape over that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually duplicate, unlock that, duplicate this layer. If I hold down Alt, so if I hold down Alt and I drag it, that's going to duplicate that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make an inverse shape. So I'm going to click both these guys. So I have the outlines that I made in this outline. I'm going to lock that guy. And I'm going to say make compound path. And so it's joining all these guys together. And if I drop that guy out, so basically it's supposed to do these guys as white. It didn't work out that time. So if I go here to Pathfinder and I click on that option there, it's going to do what I wanted it to do. And so now that's more of a solid void relationship for that. And I can drag my main axis guy further up again. And then this is also useful if I want to bring in a pattern or some kind of texture file. So I'll copy that out of there. Come here. Oh, so I can't do that when it's locked. I'm going to make a new layer for pattern. Paste that in, and I'm just going to drag that. And now what I can do with this is I can take my compound path, which is here, and I can put my pattern under that, and I can select that and that at the same time. If I right click and say make clipping mask, it's going to put that pattern in there if I wanted to, say, have some kind of pattern there. And I can reduce the opacity on that if I want. And it's just a different way of kind of starting to show a similar idea. So there's the neat little thing here that I just want to show you real quick that Eli did. So it's a similar concept where he had this thing called, which I liked, called grunge, which is just basically, and this is actually kind of a nice texture. We'll give you these files so you can play around with them if you like. And what he did with grunge was, and then rasterize that. So we'll go here with it. Is transform that down. Now remember how I said I saved that selection. He's basically using this to give the drawing a little more texture on the interior. So if I go back to my channels, I undo all that, and I think it was ambiance that I wanted. All right, so now I'm just going to magic wand that. I have that selected. Come back to here. I can again invert my selection. I can cut that, and then I can come back to my grunge layer. I can now bump down the opacity. What he did was this thing called overlay. Yeah, and you can see it gives it a little bit of texture, and I think he did that over ambiance. Yeah, so it's giving you some texture through it rather drawing. So that's just a nice little effect as well. All right, guys. It's a lot maybe, but any questions or concerns? Okay, so thank you for your attention, and